So good morning and good afternoon to colleagues from around the world. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar that's being hosted by the Development Cooperation Department here at MEDRC Water Research. For those of you who don't already know, MEDRC is a unique intergovernmental organisation headquartered in Muscat in the Sultanate of Oman, with a mandate to find solutions to freshwater scarcity and to support the Middle East peace process. Established in 1996, we conduct research, training, development cooperation and transboundary water projects. I'd like to briefly hand over to our Centre Director, Kieran O'Quinn, to say a few words.
Well, good morning, everybody. And my job is to speak for less than a minute and just to thank you all for being here, to thank our three really excellent speakers today who are also excellent writers. And I don't know if we've all had a chance to read their work in our brief. It's really fantastic. MEDRC, as Kirsten has said, we're a multilateral international organisation, and we've a very special mandate to be a model organisation for states seeking to use transboundary environmental issues in the support of a peace process or improving international relations. And in that work, we work with a lot of essentially diplomats and officials and agencies around the world. And this issue of gender and inclusion comes up time and time again. And our response to it institutionally in MEDRC has been, we've done four things. First of all, we've admitted we've an awful lot to learn. Second, we've decided to listen to women. Essentially, that seems to do the job most of the time. Three, we've mainstreamed consideration of gender into all that we do. And four, from time to time, we have standalone events like these. So for me today, this is actually about, number one, listening to women, listening to learn what we can do and what we should be doing better. So that's it for me. So thank you all very much for being here. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran. So just to start, my name is Kirsten Winterman, and I'm the head of the Development Cooperation Department here at MEDRC. This webinar is part of our Transboundary Water programme, and it follows on, as Kieran mentioned, from our recent guest-authored Transboundary briefing on gender and transboundary water shared participation. I'm delighted to have three of our guest authors with us today to provide some of their insights into the topic. Unfortunately, our fourth guest author wasn't able to attend today, but we'd like to extend our thanks to her, both for her contribution in the briefing and for her engagement in putting together this webinar. I'd like to begin with brief presentations from our three experts before moving on to discussion and then opening up to Q&A from our audience. Please add any questions you may have, including the person you'd like to direct them to, into the Q&A feature, and we've also got the upvote feature available as well. I'd like to first introduce Katie Bashevsky. Katie is a gender specialist with 10 years of experience managing programs in Africa, Asia and the Caribbean. She holds a master's degree in development economics and gender analysis from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and a bachelor's degree in politics, international relations from Scripps College. She currently lives in Vienna, Austria, and works as project coordinator for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Katie, over to you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So yeah, thank you again, and thanks so much for convening this webinar. I think it's very exciting that we'll have the opportunity to discuss this briefing, which I think is so interesting. As Kirsten said, my name is Katie Bashevsky. I'm currently based in Vienna, Austria, where I work with the UN Industrial Development Organization. I should just mention that I'm not here on behalf of UNIDO or in any official capacity as a UNIDO representative. In the past, I have worked as a project manager and gender specialist in Latin America, various regions of Africa and Asia, particularly on USAID-based or funded health and agriculture projects. And I've also worked with a US-based NGO called Reimagine Gender that focuses on gender education. And a lot of my work has really focused on gender education for business leaders in the private sector. So I did want to emphasize that while I've certainly worked globally, I'm definitely coming at this topic from a very US-centric viewpoint. So in my submission to the briefing, I wanted to focus on framing the definition of gender and what it means to mainstream gender. For a lot of people, gender is a theoretical concept, or it's a once a year mandated course that you have to take, but it's not something that you really fundamentally or intuitively understand. It can be foreign and it can be intimidating because it is an evolving field and language around gender can change. But gender applies to all of us. And I find that when I work with technical experts to think about why and how gender matters for their work, it helps to reflect on what gender means in our own lives. And then it becomes easier to apply in our work. So first, I wanted to talk about understandings of gender. Many definitions of gender focus on it as social roles ascribed to members of the different sexes, which is certainly true. But gender is also being further understood as a really fundamental aspect of who we are. Certainly the social aspect of it, but also the identity and bodily experiences of it. Everyone has a gender, and gender experiences how all of us interact with the world and how the world interacts with us. Gender impacts the ways we and our families think about our educations, our career paths, the families we build, the relationships we'll have, how we express our emotions, how we dress and present ourselves, how we feel in what we wear. Really most parts of our lives, gender has some effect on. And so I think that the more that we can think about and reflect on the way that those forces play out in our lives, the easier it becomes to imagine the way those forces play out in the lives of other people. Beyond learning gender as a theoretical concept, I certainly encourage you to read content like this brief. I think it gives so many great examples, particularly in the case studies. And I also encourage you to think more about your own gender story and how that's impacted your life. I think it can make it a more approachable topic. A second point I wanted to emphasize that I wrote about in my contribution to this brief is that so often we talk about the symptom and not the cause of gender inequality. So we use gender mainstreaming sometimes to identify the ways in which, for example, women are marginalized, and we address some of their specific concerns without actually addressing the underlying inequality that created that situation in the first place. So in my piece, I use the example of the common notion that better toilet or wash access can be important to protecting girls and women from gender-based violence. And that is absolutely true. It's hugely important, and we should increase girls and women's access to safe and hygienic sanitation facilities. It is the right thing to do for a lot of reasons. But at the same time, we should recognize that women being attacked when they use the toilet in a remote area is the symptom of a problem. And that problem is that someone is attacking women at their most vulnerable. Obviously, addressing the underlying causes of gender-based violence is complicated. But if we want to build a safer world for women and girls, it's vital that we think about this. We should ask ourselves how our interventions and our actions can address this underlying social norms that cause gender inequality, and also partner with organizations and projects that are explicitly working on gender equality and women's empowerment. Gender issues manifest at both micro and macro levels, and they need to be addressed at both. Yes, we need to protect individual girls and women. Yes, we need to ensure that they have a seat at the table, but we also have to think about those systemic and institutional conditions. Once a woman has a seat at the table, is her voice heard? Have we done anything to ensure that next time there's a seat at the table for women? Again, changing institutional, systemic, and societal level norms is long and hard work, but it's crucial. And I do think that the case studies in this brief do such a great job of illustrating this point and pointing to some of the great work that's happening to really fundamentally shift women's place in this industry, not just to get them in the room or to get them at the table, but to give them greater voice, give them greater decision-making power, and create institutions where women can thrive. So I'm excited to hear from my fellow contributors more on their pieces. And finally, I wanted to talk about definitions of gender as they're changing. Increasing numbers of countries are legally recognizing non-binary, trans, and third genders. For some, this can seem like a big change to gender as they know it. Many of us think of gender as women, woman or man, boy or girl. And it's not necessarily that people are changing, but the vocabulary they have to describe themselves is in some cases. Gender is a part of identities, particularly greater access to the internet is facilitating people finding new communities, reclaiming identities which have been suppressed, and finding new ways to describe themselves and their experiences. We have to keep in mind at all times that women are a marginalized gender, that women and girls, but also boys and men have gender, experience gender, and their lives are impacted in many ways by gender, and they're all hurt by rigid gender norms. But we also have to keep in mind that more and more people are living outside of the gender binary. These identities have certainly always existed, but it's growing even more common in many places for people to identify as transgender, non-binary, agender, or a third gender. And this can at times feel overwhelming. If gender is expanding, if it's always changing, how can you possibly mainstream it? So what I want to drive home is just that gender is experienced along multiple axes. It's social, it's experienced in our body and our identity. And we need to remember that every person, not just our beneficiaries, but our partners, our stakeholders, our government leaders, decision makers, our colleagues, and even we ourselves have our own gender story and a life which has been shaped by gender. And I think that if you can take that concept alone into the ways in which you think about why people do what they do, what they're going to do, and who can speak on behalf of others, you'll already do a better job of mainstreaming gender. So I think that'll help you understand people in their complexity. So I think that's all my time. I'm excited to hear from my fellow contributors and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. That's an excellent start to things. So I'd like to move now to Natasha. So Natasha Kami, an engineer by education, holds a master's degree in hydrology from environmental management, and she joined Geneva Water Hub in March 2018 and contributes to the establishment of the Global Water Observatory on Water and Peace, as well as the development of the Women, Water and Peace agenda. Prior to that, she worked as a water policy advisor to the Palestinian negotiation support project, working closely with decision makers, and has experience in bilateral and regional water negotiations. She's used to working in highly sensitive and timely political environments, and she's worked with water resources and environmental challenges in the Middle East for the past 20 years. She serves frequently as a faculty member for conferences and workshops dealing with transboundary water resources in general and hydropolitics in particular, at which water is a core political issue and international water law is a necessary framework for resolving conflicts and identifying opportunities and solutions. So Natasha, over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. First, I would just allow me to thank you, Kirsten and MEDRC, for giving me and the Geneva Water Hub, the opportunity to be part of this really, timely and impressive special issue on gender and transboundary waters. My contribution is entitled The Water Peace Discourse as an Avenue for Women Leadership in Transboundary Water Cooperation. The real objective, of this policy brief is to initiate a discussion on different policy options that would enable the enhancement of leadership opportunities for the empowerment of women, particularly in water diplomacy settings, through the elements of the water and peace discourse. The second piece of the policy brief is to share the results of the recently published a comparative study on the empowerment of women in water diplomacy in the MENA region that was conducted with our partners, the Global Water Partnership, and 4 other co-authors, focusing on Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, and Palestine. Let's start off with the water and peace discourse. Some of you might be wondering, what is the water peace discourse? And obviously, over the past century, there have been different and complementary discourses, that have been developed in relation to water. We had the water energy nexus, water food energy, and the water peace discourse actually exists between 2 poles, that of conflict and cooperation. And it's built around 2 key objectives: preventing water-related conflicts and leveraging the water as an instrument of peace. The discourse actually strengthens the linkages between SDG 6 and SDG 16. And it has been developed through the interactive dynamics between and the leadership of 3 key global initiatives. The first one is the Blue Peace Movement, which was launched in 2010 by Switzerland, which celebrated its first decade, and it has developed furthermore and is taking roots globally. The second is the Geneva Water Hub, which was established in 2014 with the support of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and the University of Geneva, as an initiative and was later institutionalized as a center of excellence of the university that is specialized in hydrodiplomacy. And the third global initiative is the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, which was launched in 2015 by 15 co-convening countries with a specific mandate over 2 years, which was to actually develop the recommendations that would leverage the use of water as a vehicle of peace globally. And I'm glad basically that we have one of our key panelists with us today, the MEDRC's director, Karen Quinn. So within 2 years, the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, they put forward the recommendations in a report entitled A Matter of Survival that covered actually 7 pertinent and relevant issues to the water diplomacy. However, within those 7 chapters and within the report itself, the issue of women was not tackled per se. So with the Geneva Water Hub being the secretariat of the panel and responsible for the implementation of most of the recommendations, we have taken on board the gender aspect of these recommendations. And we try to work on them through the 4 main axes and outcomes, which are actually based on the recommendations of the panel, whether it's through setting the agenda for water and peace, the global observatory, enforcing a legal framework for water in armed conflicts, or through the education and science on water and peace. One of the key developments since the launching of the panel report was actually the establishment of the Global Observatory on Water and Peace as a platform of entities that have the analytical skills that are needed to understand the complexities of the water and peace discourse. Among the partners to date, we have regional partners, but we also have societal partners that reflect the vision and the reflections of these societies. One of these key societal nodes is actually the women node. Next, I would like to share some of the results of the comparative study that was conducted in the 5 countries. This initially started off as a mapping exercise in 2018 in 3 of the countries, mainly Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine, and then was developed into a comparative study with the GWP-MED and 2 more countries, including Morocco and Egypt. You might be thinking, why women, water, and diplomacy? I mean, what is the linkage? I mean, this has obviously been brought about by an increased global recognition of the role of preventive diplomacy, which has really taken, lead through the convening of the UN Security Council briefing on preventive diplomacy and transboundary waters, in which they emphasize the role of water diplomacy and cooperation in conflict prevention. There's also the EU Foreign Affairs Council that had adopted the new conclusions on EU water diplomacy, the presence of 2 global conventions, and of course, the landmark, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. With that as a background, we, the 6 co-authors, decided to conduct this comparative study on what are really the challenges that exist in these 5 countries of the MENA to the attainment of women to decision-making positions, and including being, heads of negotiating teams or being ministers. I would just like to take one moment to really emphasize what our collective approach was. We do recognize that there are social, political, and institutional challenges to our advancement in water diplomacy. But we also emphasize that it is not solely the responsibility of women. I mean, this is something that is incumbent on all members of society to support women empowerment. And one of the key issues of conducting this mapping exercise is that we do believe that the acquiring of skills that are needed for a good water diplomat would actually provide the opportunities that are currently missing for the attainment of decision-making positions. I just want to be clear that this is not a statistical analysis. It is not a gender analysis. It's simply meant to provide an indicative understanding of the challenges faced and the opportunities that are available. This whole mapping and the comparative study is based on a questionnaire that was developed in order to be able to actually, get the feedback from female water experts that have been working in the water sector in the 5 countries. The first area of analysis that we were interested in was how are these women, what is the level of education of the women, and is this being reflected in terms of, their promotion or their positioning? Often we are being told that, women are not in key decision-making positions because there is a lack of female expertise. A comparison among the 5 countries has shown that at least between 50 to 80% of the women that have participated in the questionnaire either hold master's or PhD degrees. However, this does not in any way reflect into their positioning. They are, usually in middle management, however, less in senior management. The next area of analysis was about, what the factors are that contribute to a workplace female-male ratio. We asked every participant, every respondent to actually use, to check a particular ratio from their own perspective. What do they think is the male to female ratio? And then we wanted to analyze what are the really dominant factors that contribute to this. Of course, there were differences. There's a diversion, differences, country-specific differences between the 5 countries. However, the 3 dominant factors were basically, a male-dominant society and the lack of both the legal and the policy frameworks that are needed to empower women in these positions. The third area of analysis was to look into what factors would actually influence a woman's decision in actually accepting or declining a decision-making position. And again, there were differences among the countries. However, the factors that, were scored the highest were actually lack of opportunity, lack of support from peers, and the lack of comprehensive skills, which led to the next area of analysis. We wanted to really explore what are these comprehensive skills? What do these women water experts feel that they need to further develop in terms of their skills to actually better lead in water diplomacy positions? And the 2 key skill areas were diplomacy and international skills and a better knowledge of related legal instruments. So what next? After this comparative study, we are with our partner GWP Med, and through the initiative, we are putting in place a mentorship and capacity building program targeting, a specific number of women that have actually become part of this informal network within the 5 countries throughout the past year, and starting 2018, the women that have participated actually in the questionnaire. At the Geneva Water Hub and within the Water and Peace Discourse, we want to conduct more research into women leaders in transboundary water cooperation and negotiations, because obviously, the literature is really poor. We want to strengthen the voice of women as a societal node in the Global Observatory, and we want to also assist in engendering the other platforms within this Water and Peace Discourse and at the Geneva Water Hub, mainly the Arts for Water Peace platform and the Media Water Diplomat platform. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Natasha. That was really informative, and I think there's already some questions coming up about that, so we will take that up in the Q&A. Perfect. Last but not least, we have Natalia Ostajic. So apart from having successfully obtained an MA in International Studies at the University of Belgrade and having attended the University of Oslo, having a Master's in International Development, Natalia has over 11 years of professional experience working for the government, civil society, and international organisations on ensuring that gender is appropriately integrated into policy development, budget analysis, legislation and other methodologies and approaches in a manner that is appropriate for the West Balkans context, through building capacities of political parties, relevant governmental institutions, local self-governments, CSOs and women entrepreneurs, thus enabling women to take a more prominent role as economic, social and political change agents and innovators in the region. She currently holds a position of technical project analyst in charge of implementing Serbian component of the UN Women Regional Programme, ending violence against women in the Western Balkans and Turkey, implementing norms, changing minds. She's passionate about design thinking, social innovation and mainstreaming gender into climate change policies and activities. Many thanks, Natalia, and over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank MEDRC for giving me the opportunity, first of all, to provide my insights for the special issue on Transboundary Waters briefing series on gender, and then, of course, for giving me the opportunity to be part of this webinar today. It is great to see some of the familiar faces after quite some time, and also to meet, at least virtually, colleagues who have also contributed to the briefing series on gender. As Kirsten has mentioned, my name is Natalia, and though I'm currently engaged at UN Women, I'm here today in a capacity of a gender specialist passionate about mainstreaming gender into environmental issues. Within the briefing series, I have provided my insights on the importance of advocating and negotiating for gender mainstreaming into relevant environmental processes to achieve sustainable development for all. I have also provided a small case study on building derivative small hydropower plants in Western Balkans and how non-state actors and civil society organizations influenced this process. So to begin with, and to continue along the lines that Katie and Natasha have just mentioned, the usual entry point when we speak about gender and the environment of climate change is that the consequences of climate change, which include changes in weather patterns, rising sea levels, and more extreme weather conditions, have a negative impact primarily on human lives. And then on national, of course, economies, communities, countries, and scientists unfortunately assume that this impact will be even more negative in the future. There have been various studies, international and non-governmental organizations, telling us that women face greater risks and pressures due to climate change, especially if they belong to the poorer sections of the population. Things like unequal participation of women in community politics, decision-making processes in both public and private spheres, and in the labor markets increase pre-existing inequalities and often prevent women from contributing in any way to planning, creating, and implementing subsequently various climate change decisions and activities. So my second point within the briefing series is that although there are these obstacles that women face, we should be aware that at the same time, women and girls around the world continue to fight against gender stereotypes and suffer discrimination and violence, regardless of the social position they occupy, their level of education and age. Gender equality is not just one of the basic human rights. Gender equality is one of the key preconditions for peaceful and sustainable development. And the creation of sustainable economies and their further growth, but also the progress of the entire humanity is only possible and attainable if women and girls have equal access to healthcare, education, dignified work, and equal participation in the political life of every society. Although there are different definitions of gender equality, which I'm not going to go into today, it is important to note that through the process of growing up and adopting social norms that are accepted as a standard in a community, gender becomes one of the key structural factors in defining and organizing basically every society. Perhaps the most obvious example of this is the different roles that men and women have in so-called productive and reproductive work, where productive roles are defined as work that women and men perform for money or some other benefit, while reproductive roles are those responsibilities related to care, family, raising children, and housework. Everything that women and men do in one day, whether paid or not, all interactions with community in which they live, as well as opportunities to participate in decision-making processes, either at the family level or a wider community level, are in fact a reflection of the different gender roles that these societies attribute to men and women, and the different resources available to them. So gender theorists have developed many tools and methodologies that help decision makers understand all of these differences and take them into account when developing and adopting different policies that affect everyone regardless of their sex and gender, including environmental issues, climate change, and transboundary water management. Furthermore, when we talk about gender equality, the most common criticism that I hear made by the public is related to the fact that gender equality is equated with women and women's human rights. That is, that policies and activities in the field of achieving gender equality are completely focused on women, girls. So I would like to stress that this is not, or at least should not be true. Any reflection and work on gender equality, as well as all other areas in which we create some policies and make decisions, should equally consider the different positions, roles, needs, and potential contributions of both women and men. And I think that we're going to be discussing that further on during the webinar. So gender equality consists of two equally important parts, and any work that would exclude either of these two parts means that we are not using the full potential of our societies, be it men or women. I continue by saying that climate change and the consequences of climate change affect all people on the planet, regardless of their sex and their gender. However, the expectations, roles, and the rights of both women and men are defined by different frameworks in which each society views men and women. And exactly these small different social roles attributed to men and women can cause different effects of climate change on men and women, where women are often being the ones disproportionately negatively affected by climate change. If, for example, we consider issues such as access to different resources or to justice, freedom of movement or opportunity, and the power to influence decision-making processes and politics in general, we will see that women are at a disadvantage compared to men. They participate less in decision-making processes, as Natasha briefly also mentioned, at all levels, often have limited access to resources, and their freedom of movement is limited by social norms and expectations within a society. Nevertheless, it should not be forgotten that women have valuable knowledge and experience in managing households, farms, natural resources, and that they can and should contribute to finding different big but significant solutions to the challenges of climate change. In this sense, the specific gender roles and responsibilities that women have in a society can be seen as an opportunity for their equal engagement in the fight against climate change. Another important issue that I mentioned is the policy level and the level of international treaties. In this sense, it is important to mention the agreement reached back in 2010 in Mexico at the 16th session of the parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the so-called UNFCCC, where in the process of actually institutionalizing the introduction of gender mainstreaming in climate negotiations has been started, especially in the areas of adaptation and capacity building. So in Mexico, 11 years ago, the very first decision on shared vision for climate action confirmed that gender equality and effective participation of women are crucial for combating climate change. 4 years later, we adopted the first Lima work program on gender, with primary goal of increasing gender equality through policies and practices, encouraging gender equality primarily in decision-making processes, and responding to gender issues in the development, implementation, and monitoring of climate policies and programs. Back in November 2017, the first Gender Action Plan was adopted. And finally, in December 2019, at the conferences of parties, 25th conferences of parties of the UNFCCC, a new 5-year enhanced Lima work program on gender has been agreed with a new gender action plan. And this new gender action plan actually covers 2020 to 2024 and has 5 priority areas with specific objectives, activities that we should be implementing at the moment, actually. So my case study from Serbia and the very last parts of the issue that I wrote about in my article is about non-state actors, that is civil society organizations and informal groups. Though they do not often have traditional forms of political power, such as legislative or executive, I claim actually that through alternative channels, like the key skills and resources that they have, arising from, of course, their knowledge and experience, broad membership, political and financial independence, they actually influence decision-making processes in the area of environmental policies and in the area of climate change, transboundary water management, etc. So the main sources, as I have shortly mentioned, of their power include knowledge and information, economic resources, and position in the global economy, as well as the capacities for transnational networking and mobilization. In this sense, it is very important to actually thank the women and gender constituency within the UNFCCC, who have worked tirelessly for the past 10, 15 years, and who have actually brought about all of these policies and guidelines adopted by the UNFCCC, enabling gender mainstreaming into the activities in the area of climate change. So as I think that my time is slowly running out, just to shortly wrap up, I believe that it would be interesting to shortly mention the case study of the Western Balkans and the projects, over 3,000 projects of construction of small hydropower plants that have been approved in the recent years. While in the country where I live, in Serbia, there have been almost 1,000 of such plans to build power plants in small mountainous rivers. So the small hydropower plants are predominantly of derivation type in the Western Balkans, known as the ones that are most destructive to ecosystems, and they are small, intended for construction on small mountain rivers. Unlike large rivers on which powerful power plants are built, where the operation machinery is in the dam itself, these rivers do not have enough water mass for this method of electricity production. Therefore, a different approach is chosen. With these mini hydropower plants, the process begins with the construction of a small dam and the formation of a water intake. Then ready-made wide pipes are let down in trenches along the river band. And consequently, the drop in the water required to start the turbine is obtained by placing the river in a derivation pipe and directing its flow through the pipes all the way to the engine room, which is located downstream and where electricity is produced. So although these small hydropower plants do not pollute the environment in the way, for example, traditional thermal power plants do, their construction process and the very existence actually causes significant environmental devastation. The way they are constructed causes that from the water intake all the way to the engine rooms, where in principle the river should continue its natural flow, there is no more water, and downstream from the engine rooms, the rivers often dry up completely and vanish. So as a response from non-state actors and groups of citizens, throughout 2018 and 2019, a citizen initiative to defend rivers in eastern Serbia organized numerous environmental protests across the country, demanding reviewing the cadastre of potential locations of these small hydropower plants with the aim of reducing their number, banning the construction of new plants in protected areas, such as national parks, and removing all already illegally built small hydropower plants. In addition, they have been using all available legal means to stop the issuance of new permits for the construction of the new plants, and immediately halting works underway on existing ones. It was very exciting to see actually that in small and almost abandoned villages in eastern Serbia, basically at the last settlements before the Bulgarian border, elderly villagers, mostly women over 80 years old, have been on 24-hour guard for almost a month back in 2019 in an attempt to protect their rivers from building these derivative small hydropower plants. And eventually, they have managed to defend their rivers from the construction of 6 small hydropower plants in this area, as many as were planned there. So similarly, also back in 2019, women from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from a small village in central Bosnia, won also an award from the German Euro Natur Foundation for protests that prevented the construction of 2 mini hydropower plants in their villages. These women in Bosnia were on duty for more than 500 days, blocking the local bridge and preventing the passage of heavy machines and the construction of small hydropower plants. So as a way of concluding today's presentation, many people in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans, live hard lives, and environmental protection is still not a priority, unfortunately. However, the struggle against small hydropower plants has united many different interests. And for more than 3 years now, the public and citizens across the Balkans, and especially women, have been fighting for the rights to water and against run-of-river small hydropower plants, and not giving up on their struggle. So it is possible, that through informal gatherings and putting public pressure to yield some results that actually protect the nature and protect our lives, both women and men. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natalia. That was really informative and helpful to see something a little more in practice as well. So I'd like to move on to the Q&A. Sorry, not the Q&A, the discussion side of things. And I'd like to start by asking a question to Katie and Natasha with regards to what you think the biggest challenges are to achieving gender equality in a transboundary water context. If I can ask you to just have brief comments, so maximum of 2 minutes each. Katie, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be really brief. I think that, as I spoke about a bit in my presentation, I think that there are certainly challenges at all levels, at the micro and the macro level. And I think, the more fundamental and time intensive changes are those macro level changes. I think, as I spoke about a bit, not only how do we get women to the table, but how do we ensure that it's easier for women to get to the table next time? How do we make sure that those women are in an environment where they can thrive, that their voices are being heard? And I think Natasha's presentation about some of the barriers that women in the MENA region have faced really spoke to that. And I think that Anamika's piece, which she's unfortunately not on this webinar right now, but she spoke, they wrote about the ways in which transboundary water spaces in the sector itself is foundationally male and masculinized in a way that I thought was so interesting and so important. And so I think one of the greatest challenges is really, reconsidering all of these notions that we have to the point where we're actually integrating gender into the ways that we fundamentally think about systems and institutions.
Thanks very much, and thank you for being so succinct as well. Natasha, on to you.
Okay, well, I think I just want to start off, to say that it's correct that, in other sectors as well, gender equality is off track. So there are some of the challenges that are common to other sectors. However, I think, the complexity of transboundary water, offers bigger challenges. For one thing, I think one of the main challenges is that both the technical and the political aspects of transboundary waters are traditionally, male dominant and labeled. And within that context, it's really not easy, to walk into an all males club. The other challenge is the educational system that, women are taught early on that diplomacy and water-related disciplines are off their charts. And another challenge, I think, is this evolving approach, to transboundary waters and this repetitive labeling of women as being, one of the vulnerable groups when talking about WASH. We're either vulnerable groups or we're either victims. So this terminology that is actually used to describe women, as a group is already in contradiction from my perspective, with the notion of women being equal partners, within the transboundary context. The last challenge is that, this is really entails a slow process of change and behavior, and also of acceptance of women at the table. And we have to really recognize that and be patient and not be discouraged, by the fact that, I think, Katie said that the change is progressive.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natasha. I'd like to move on to thinking about how this change can happen. So informal decision-making bodies, as we've discussed, they're often dominated by men, and even though women are there, they're often seen to be local, on-the-ground experts who manage the water in terms of the household, but they are most vulnerable to climate change impacts. So does obtaining shared petition require new decision-making structures on water and environmental resources, or more equitable involvement in these current structures? And how can we do that? So, for example, does having a female head of a water authority address that issue, or what more can we be doing? So I'd like to first go to Natalia for your comments on this. So around 2 minutes again, please.
Okay, thank you. So when I first saw the question, I was thinking, what is the definition of actually equitable involvement? And then what is the definition of new decision-making structures? Because I would say that we need both, more equitable involvement in the current structures, which are, in a matter of fact, will lead to a new decision-making structures being built. Of course, there is always the question, how we should do it. And what is considered as equitable? Is it 30% or 40%, or is it half-half? So I would say that there is definitely need for a series, of positive measures to strengthen institutional mechanisms, such as either framework laws or there are different programs, action plans, setting up gender equality committees in governing structures in order to make up for lost time in this field. I would also add that current structures have a responsibility to promote women's access to decision-making positions, and that media has also or should have a role to play in informing wider public about the place of women in decision-making in water management. How we should do it? I think that objectives should be set for achieving a minimum of 40% representation of women on decision-making bodies. I am a big proponent of quotas to start with, though they might be sometimes unpopular in wider public. But I see them as a valuable tool for increasing women's engagement in these kinds of institutions and organizations. And we also need to develop women's leadership skills so they can participate in policymaking and promote their, socioeconomic empowerment. In this sense, simply having a female head of a water authority, I believe, will not address the issue. The problem is quite broader, I would say. Simply adding women to a process does not address questions of power. Decision-making processes and bodies operate within existing political, social, and cultural systems and relationships. And without addressing all of these underlying causes of gender inequalities, the negative social impacts of these inequalities cannot be overcome. So I believe that it is crucial to enable the circumstances that turn women's presence into meaningful participation and translates into meaningful influence within decision-making processes.
Thank you very much. And if I can come to Natasha, and there's also a question in the chat that links into this with regards to whether there are any intentional actions in not having women involved in this. So I wonder if you could just touch on that as well, Natasha. Is it related to capacity, which I think, as you've said in your presentation, most definitely not, or is it just the systems that are there? So if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Thanks. Well, I'll just follow up. I mean, on the issue of quotas. I think myself personally, I'm not in favor, of this like a general, quotas, because we can often say, that, let's say, a particular, which is the case when we're doing the questionnaire, within the ministries of water, we will find that, we have even an equal percentage of women, or even, the claim is that, we have more women than men, within the structure. I would probably, go more into the kind of quota that, it's a kind of detailed quota, which looks, which specifies, a percentage in middle management, a percentage in senior management. Otherwise, as you go, as you start going up from bottom up, you find that you have a high percentage of women. Then as you go up, it becomes less. So I'm quite skeptical about, the quota issue in the terms, in the way that it is used. I mean, in trying to answer this question, that you asked, Kirsten, I was, thinking of 3 levels. Is it enough? I mean, definitely, I agree. It's not enough because it's a first step, that we should be, encouraging, but it's part of a slow and long process of change. I mean, it would really be naive to assume that just because we have a female head, that would be able to achieve, a progress when the rest of the political machinery is male dominant. And your question, resonates with the conversation that I had with a rising, female water diplomat from the MENA, who was actually questioning the possibility of change because, as she put it, she said, the rules are set by men and for men. And, even if I am, sitting at the table, then, the higher up the ladder of decision making, it's again a male who has the final word. So that's one issue. The other issue is also, it also depends on what kind of a female, now is head at the decision making. It is very imperative, to remind ourselves that, water diplomacy is not limited to the negotiation table, but it rather occurs at all levels. So it's very important that these female, who are now in a decision-making position, they have the strong knowledge of all the levels and the sensibilities, including, being, leaders of local crises where actually women are at the forefront of meeting the challenges. So, we do want to have, women champions, women water champions, but we don't want them to be elite in a way that, they are completely disconnected. We want them to make sure that they continue to actually convey those grievances at the local level, even when they are at a decision-making level. And the last point, I think, which also, was also from the experience of the mapping exercise that we've conducted, is that, this particular female now head should be herself an advocate of women empowerment, because, during some of the interviews that were conducted, I mean, there were key women that had attained, decision-making positions in water diplomacy. And when they were asked whether they are willing, to mentor or to take action, and this is, I think, what Katie mentioned, how do we ensure that the next, at the next level, we will also have more women, their answers were like, no, I'm not interested because, I made it by myself. And I think, that others should also find their own way.
Thanks very much, Natasha. I'd like to move on to one of the topics that we come up against in some of our work. So in the area of scientific research, it can be easy to assume that research, particularly water research, is gender blind or gender neutral, and thus opportunities and awards are based solely on merit. So how would you challenge this notion and the idea that research is gender blind? So if I can first come to Katie, for some of your comments, just very brief, please.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think as evidenced by what I said in my presentation, I would maybe be the unpopular voice in saying that I think it is truly impossible for anything to ever be gender neutral. I think gender pervades our lives and ourselves in so many ways that it's truly impossible to fully unpack that. And it impacts the type of schooling we get, the type of opportunities we get, and it certainly impacts opportunities for funding, opportunities for promotion. In academic research, it impacts, women are less likely to be cited, thus they are less likely to be published. Women who do publish, equal to their male colleagues, are still less likely to get tenure. And all of this goes into what we value as merit. So I think we need to question our ideas of merit. I think we need to all assume that we carry some gender bias. And I think we need to find the tools to address that, just going in with that assumption ahead of time.
Perfect, thanks very much. And Natalia, just a few quick comments from you on this issue.
I completely agree with Katie. I don't think that there is any area of our life or, that is gender blind or neutral, and that we should always try and, to actually change the current gender patterns and roles and norms that are in place in order to make them more sensitive and to have a more transformational influence on the entire societies. So in this sense, regarding the transboundary water management and environmental issues, we shape our environments, our natural environment. So including transboundary water management, these systems, the social and ecological systems, should not be considered in isolation from one another. They are interconnected. So the entire idea, I would say, of socio-ecological resilience actually provides a framework to understand this dynamic and the complex interactions that do occur between the community and the natural environment. So in this sense, I strongly stand against the belief that any kind of scientific research is gender blind or neutral. And at the same time, as also Katie mentioned briefly, we should try to have as much as possible gender responsive programs and policies that would rethink gender norms, roles, and inequalities, and take active measures to actually address them.
Perfect, thank you very much. And on that conversation about gender norms, we obviously know that gender norms impact women's involvement in transboundary water use, as we've talked about here. But how do gender norms then impact men in the transboundary water space? And I'd actually kind of like to come back to Natalia straight away and then on to Natasha afterwards.
So that was very, interesting question. And I would like to go back to some of the things that I have previously mentioned. When we speak about gender equality, we don't speak only about women and girls, we also speak about men and boys. And that's an important thing to have in mind. We do tend to focus on women when we speak about environmental issues, or for example, water management, because they are still not sufficiently represented, and additional work should be done in this sense. But there is actually a very interesting example from Central Asia, because they have been working a lot on water resource management and gender consideration. And I would like to provide an example from there, as specific to the answering this question. So one of the gender experts at the Central Asian Alliance on Water shared her experiences from Kyrgyzstan, where more than half of the country water associations actually have gender balanced boards. So, she said that when women are board members of these associations, they are more efficient because women are the main water users. For example, when men only are on board members, they decide on water supply for 4 consecutive hours a day and do not take into account the needs of the specific households. So in this sense, we, again, like reiterating, we need both women and men making decisions and being much more informed on water needs. And in this way, we should know better how to proceed in this water management and where the next pipe should be built, to ease the burden on families.
Thanks very much. And Natasha, your comments on this issue?
I'm trying to build on that and to think, reading through the introduction that you had made, Kirsten, for the brief, and you've done a wonderful overview, of all the different definitions that were related to gender. I was thinking that if we take the keywords from all of these definitions and we put them up, we will find out that most of these norms they are socially structured. So we come across things like biases, but like prejudice, like opportunities. And all of these, basically, obviously, I would think that they affect definitely women. So basically, these gender norms do affect how women are perceived as female, whether decision makers or negotiators. But they also tend to have, like a negative impact also on the way that these men they perceive women in decision making. I don't have specific examples from a gender perspective, but I do have my own like personal experiences, of which were not any smoother than others, in which I always had to put in more effort, to have my expertise and advice, appreciated by my male counterparts. So I think that one way of being able to come around this is basically to be comfortable with the fact that these are simply social constructs. And I'm really glad that there are more young women now who are taking interest in disciplines such as engineering, international relations, in law, in the social sciences aspect of water. And throughout the work that we've been doing for the past 3 years, with the International Secretariat on Water, with the World Youth Parliament on Water and the European Youth Parliament, I can actually see that, these gender norms are being challenged, and that, there's more of an acceptance that, in the future, generations, there would be, a gender equality, at least on, the transboundary water issues.
Great, thank you very much there. And just one final question before we go to the Q&A. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, what opportunities and challenges do you see for building back better and creating a more gendered approach to water management? So I'd like to come first to Katie, and then all three of you actually for a brief comment, but first to Katie. Thanks very much.
Sure, absolutely. I'll try to focus on opportunities, because I think it's been all too easy for all of us to focus on the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has posed. I think for better or worse, COVID-19 has forced all of us to rethink what seemed normal and the ways of doing things. It's a small thing in some ways, but I think that it's, again, for better or worse, we've all been forced to learn new technologies, embrace new technologies. Everyone has Zoom now, and it's certainly not perfect. I know a lot of us are excited for the day when we can be back in an office together, we can hold these meetings and presentations in person. At the same time, I think there is a democratizing effect to having, remote learning opportunities, remote participation opportunities, allowing people to call in to join meetings can reduce the burden of travel, it can reduce the cost. Certainly, it involves a good internet connection, power, a computer. There certainly are barriers, but I still think that continuing to embrace and integrating all of these, especially remote and online technologies that we've had to embrace during this time, can bring opportunities to women and girls and to men and boys who might not have been able to enter this space before.
Thanks very much. Natalia, can I come to you next?
Yes, so I recently read a very interesting article from WaterAid that basically said that, the poorest and the least powerful sections of all societies are likely to be badly affected in crisis, but we can all work to alleviate inequalities throughout our response. So we've been mentioning that women and girls are the main collectors of water used by the households or community, and they have already been recognized as a group that is negatively impacted in terms of their education, safety, livelihoods. The added dimension of the COVID-19 has even worsened these disadvantages, I would say. And in some regions, social distancing as well and lockdown rules have resulted in reemergence of gender role of caring for those infected and for the elderly, with the virus falling, of course, predominantly on women. So in addition, I also think that we should also think about those members of our community that have some disabilities or are marginalized for various reasons and are often completely forgotten in water resource management. I would say that the current crisis has also exposed the deepened inequalities that exist when it comes to persons with disabilities and other marginalized groups. In this sense, I would say that 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development embraces the fulfillment of human rights for all, with the leaving no one behind principle, and that we should adopt a human rights approach to water management as an imperative if we achieve the SDGs. But also we want to build a more resilient world as we reconstruct our lives and economies in the transition from COVID-19. And then finally, I would say that the complexity of the problems that we are facing now can seem overwhelming. How do we begin to understand and address the problems we are faced with? Water provides the key. If we get out water management right, if we recognize how it is interconnected and develop in a way holistic, integrated solutions, then we will have some chance to address the challenges that threaten to undermine our lives and livelihoods, I would say.
Okay. And Natasha, just some final comments on this issue as well.
Well, I think, in addition to, what has been said, I think that, I agree, with Katie that we have to look at the opportunities. And the fact that, COVID-19 has unveiled, the global fragility and vulnerability, and these were previously issues that were, often associated with women. But COVID-19 has also, unveiled the interconnectedness of countries and continents. And we found a lot of these, states and organizations that have analyzed the impacts of COVID-19 with key conclusions, for the post-recovery, with including, the need for multilateralism, which offers wonderful opportunities for empowerment of women. The need basically to adjust the way we work, to communicate, to build resilience. And the role of women leaders in managing the crisis has actually been spoken about and given credit. So I think that it's clear that collective intelligence is needed. Cooperation beyond national boundaries is needed. And what is also a good opportunity, for the empowerment of women is that, globally there's a recognition that there's more need for STEM and inclusiveness, and that working from home is no longer, a crippling factor.
Thanks very much. I'd like to lead on to the Q&A now, and there's actually a question in here with regards to how gender can be better incorporated into development programming, and I think that leads on really nicely from what you have all just touched on. So how can gender be taken into account in our development program? And if you have some concrete examples of some previous work, that would be really useful. Katie, could I come to you first?
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the key things is that so often, I think we all see examples of design being done, many decisions being made, and then the gender component being added on, or then us going to, a group of female stakeholders and asking for their validation of what's already been created. So I would say just bringing a more diverse group of people in at the very beginning, thinking about how to bring women to the table, bring diverse women to the table, and recognize that, one woman cannot necessarily speak for all women and all women's experiences at that early design stage can help you create really integrate it through all parts of your program and not have sort of that tacked on piece at the end.
Natalia, could you provide some comment on this as well, please?
I apologize. I've actually been looking at the chat while you were, saying the question. So if you could repeat it, just.
Sure. So just how can gender be incorporated into some of the developmental programming better, essentially? I think some of your work in the Western Balkans, this is particularly relevant to. So how do we make sure gender is included right at the beginning of any interventions, and it's not, as Katie just said, a tack on halfway through?
Well, I agree with everything what Katie said. And another problem, at least I see in the region, is that we often lack relevant data when it comes to gender and different areas of our work, including environment, climate change, water management. So as I said, I completely agree with Katie in the saying that unfortunately, it often happens that when you read, for example, different project documents or initiatives, there is always a question on gender equality. And it is always like more or less copy-paste answer given to within this Word document. And then you will see that later on during the implementation of this initiative or even monitoring the effects that it has, there is no gender at all. So it is like often gender is seen like as a tick the box. So you have provided some kind of answer how you will be dealing with gender issues within this initiative, and that's it. So again, I also think that we should be trying and aiming to include gender from the very beginning of thinking about what should be done and how we should do it, and include as much women as possible, as diverse women as possible, representing diverse group of women. And then again, for all of that, we also need more data because we need more information on women, on their position and specific area, on how we could improve their position, etc. So we need more research on gender. And then we need to do gender assessments of different areas and include gender from the very beginning of an initiative that we are working on.
Great, thanks very much. I'd like to move on slightly. So one of the questions is with regards to how policymakers can create more opportunities and how can we ensure that women stay in the sector after completing their studies. So I want to come to Natasha here. I know some of the work that you've done and obviously the recent study into the MENA region. How do we empower women who are highly educated to continue working in the sector?
Well, I think, I'm reading the question and I'm thinking, is it the policymakers that create more opportunities? The policymakers, we want to encourage the policymakers. We want to encourage for example, parliamentarians that are responsible, for the drafting of these policies, to be more gender sensitive, and to put in place, as you said, within the mapping that we've done, there's obviously a lack of policy and legal frameworks. So that role is basically, where we can work with the policymakers. Now, in terms of opportunities, I think, that's it's possibly, the implementation of these policy and legal frameworks. For example, in Egypt, when we did the comparison among the 4 countries, most of the respondents, and the, a mapping of what exists in terms of policy and legal frameworks are existing in Egypt. You have the frameworks in order to empower women, but it is an issue of the lack of implementation. So I think the question would sort of be, how can we ensure the implementation of these, policies or these legal frameworks? That is what is missing, and that is what would offer the opportunities, enlarge the opportunities. What would encourage women to stay? I think, after their studies, it's probably, the ability not to have to choose between, a career and your responsibilities. And I think, with COVID, I often say that, and I think, I'm quite convinced by this, that, the fact that there's been this ability to have this distant working and to have more flexibility and to focus more, on results or, outcomes, more than the actual hours, that you are spending in your workplace, are already, providing new opportunities for women to stay engaged in the water sector.
Great, thanks very much for that. Natalia?
I just wanted to add a bit, because there is great actually resource, a very interesting book by Alice Egley and Linda Carley from 2007, and that's called Through the Labyrinth, The Truth About How Women Become Leaders, that basically in which they address why, despite real progress being made, and we witness it, women still remain rare enough in high positions of power. So there is an interesting notion that I believe we all have heard about the glass ceiling, the metaphor of glass ceiling, as some kind of transparent obstruction with a goal within sight, but somehow unattainable to women. So Egley and Carley introduce a new idea of a labyrinth, conveying the idea that, this is a complex journey towards a goal worth striving for. So it is not like a glass ceiling, it's more of a labyrinth and more of a passage through one, which is not simple or direct. So women face quite a number of obstacles on their way, and they require, to be persistent, aware of one's progress, and, there is a need of analyzing the puzzles and the obstacles that they lie ahead in a way. So, we've had female chief executives, we have university presidents, we have state governors, but still, we do not have equitable decision-making processes at all levels and in all spheres of our lives. So I would say that it is not about single obstacle, it is about the complexity actually and the variety of challenges that women can face in their leadership journeys. So, and it also what I believe Natasha has mentioned previously, women are not turned away only when they achieve the highest positions, but they are also turned away in various numbers at many points leading up to that stage, mid-levels as well. So we should all have that, in mind when discussing women in leadership. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much there, Natalia. I'd just like to come to one of the comments in here, looking at gender from a non-binary lens and how that translates into actions on the ground in terms of stakeholder engagement. So I wonder if, Katie, you could provide some comments on this for us.
Sure, happy to. I think that's a great question. I unfortunately don't have a great answer to it. I think that this is really, I think best practices in terms of engaging people outside of the gender binary is really nascent, and we're all still learning a lot. I would say that I would emphasize that the experience of, non-binary, transgender, agender people varies significantly around the world, and what it means to engage those stakeholders varies a lot around the world. As I said, there are increasing numbers of countries where these are legally recognized identities, but there's equally are countries where these identities are criminalized, and there are places where people face a lot of danger. So I think that we always need to be cognizant, obviously never put anybody at in harm's way. But I would say that the best place for anybody to start is to engage with, local stakeholder groups. And a lot of the time, those communities can either be found through or, can be referred onto via active LGBTQ networks within a country or within a community. So that is where I would say to start. The best way to learn what people need is from them themselves.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to come to nearly our final question. So what are the pitfalls for NGOs and international organisations working in the field of water diplomacy, transboundary water, with regards to promoting and working towards gender equality in their programming? I'd like to come to Natalia first, please.
Yes, sure. So I think that we have, in a way, mentioned all of the potential pitfalls already. So in a sense that, for one, there should be like a clear gender, I would say, a plan from the very beginning that should be implemented continuously and revisited in a sense to see whether it works or not. So it's not only about, writing a paragraph and then, having a policy and not implementing it, I would say. Again, there is also like not only the with NGOs and international organizations, but also I would say in all places where decisions are being made, the issue of, the question of whether we have sufficient number of women, which we also talked about a bit, and then supporting them to actually be part of these processes and bodies. I think we do, but there is also like a need to institutionalize the work on gender within the NGOs, and have a very detailed and plans and actions, and continuously going back to them, see whether we are achieving the results that we want to achieve, and then of course amend them if needs be. But it's not like a box that you tick. It's a work that basically, I believe, never ends. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I wonder if, Natasha, we can come to you on this as well. What pitfalls have you seen in your experience and in your work in this area?
Well, I think, when I was working, previously, with the NGOs, I think one of the challenges is that we tend to think, that usually, governments are responsible for ensuring gender equality. And, and basically when implementing projects, and this has been mentioned before, that, it's all about ticking the box. Ticking the box when reporting for a project that is financed by one of the development agencies. And, I think we have to be, for the NGOs or the civil society or these development agencies, I think there has to be a more let's say, honest, a reflection, and to have this kind of, a monitoring also a post-project to ensure that, really this project has contributed, it has met a target, not just during the period of the project, but I mean, after the completion of the project. It shouldn't be just, we shouldn't absolve ourselves from the responsibility of having a role, side by side by the government on the issue of gender. So maybe in terms of, not just reporting, but even in the design of the project, during the consultations, civil societies and these development agencies could, start working with a targeted group of women to ensure that, beyond the period of the project, that these women continue to be empowered and to have an active role, in whatever water-related project or initiative that they have actually financed or they have actually implemented.
Great, thank you very much. And I think now we're running out of time, so I just want to come to one final question to all of you, and that is any final remarks or lessons learned that you would suggest we sort of take forward and think about further from this webinar. Can I come to Katie first, please?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you again, and thanks to all the attendees for spending this time with us. As I said in my presentation, I encourage everyone to think about the ways that gender plays out in their own lives, in their own relationships, in their own professional careers. I think that can really bring home and make more intuitive what we're talking about when we talk about these issues. Other than that, I hope people have been, informed by and inspired by the wealth of resources, the wealth of knowledge, organizations working on these issues. I hope we can all be unafraid to admit when we don't know the answer, that we're all trying to do better, and none of us are doing perfectly, but there's such a wealth of expertise, again, a wealth of organizations that are working in this space, and I hope this has just been a great resource for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Natasha, can I come to you next?
My message, my last word would probably be on a positive note. It would be that, the mapping exercise that we've done, the work that we're doing within the Water and Peace Discourse, has a very positive outlook. There are more opportunities, that were not previously identified. And, with the pandemic, I think that, there's even more scope for these opportunities. I think for the young women, for women that are aspiring, to actually, lead in transboundary waters, I think, we're on the right track. The challenges are, common globally, although with different, the degrees, it's relative. But I think, it's quite encouraging to know that these challenges, are shared, and to know that we're starting to be on the right track. So, my message would be, very encouraging, and to say, as Katie said, we might not be doing things, the right, but I mean, it's a process, and as long as we're on track, we started, on this path, I think that the future, is promising.
Thanks very much. And Natalia, just a final comment from you before we finish.
Thank you. Yeah. So I agree with everything already said, and just adding that I think that it should be noted that we have achieved significant progress in active and meaningful participation of women, but also we should be aware at all times that this is not something that happens automatically. We do need specific efforts that enable women to influence decision-making processes in water management. And though we might face certain setbacks, we should just continue working and improving our initiatives and our programs in the area. And by doing so, I would really like to see more of gender responsive policies and programs being considered, where the existing gender norms and all the inequalities that exist would be addressed in a way. So to go beyond simply raising sensitivity or awareness and actually do something about the existing gender inequalities and power structures.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think we are out of time. Thank you very much to all of your questions, and thank you so much to our panelists for your excellent thought-provoking comments and contributions. We're absolutely delighted that we were able to put this together today. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope we see you again soon in a similar event. So thanks very much for attending, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.